This week on the Backup Wrap-Up, we are playing defense. Cybersecurity defense, to be specific. And we've recruited an amazing player for our team. Mike Saylor has spent decades on the blue team side, working side by side with hundreds of organizations as they defend themselves from an active cyber attack. He works hand in hand with the FBI and the Secret Service, and he's got a great Secret Service story that I know you'll enjoy. For our longtime listeners, this is a trimmed-down rebroadcast of Mike's appearance from last year. It was one of our most popular and insightful episodes. He gives some amazing advice and insight for organizations looking to strengthen their cybersecurity posture. I learned a lot, and I know you will too. By the way, if this is your first time listening, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been passionate about backup and recovery for over 30 years. Ever since my backups broke and I had to tell my boss we had no backups. I don't want that to happen to me. I don't want it to happen to you. That's why I do this. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I have with me a guy who once again has astonished me with knowledge that, why does he know this stuff? He's going to solve my office chair problem. Prasanna Malayandi, how's it going, Prasanna?
I'm good, Curtis. I'm good. So yeah, let's talk about you needing a new office chair.
So
just show the listeners. Just squeak.
Well, So this is, in a podcast, my mic is picking up my squeaky office chair. And so either I need a new office chair or I need to lose a few pounds. One or the other, or maybe both. But so you brought up, what was it? It was Crandall?
Yep, Crandall Furniture.
Yeah, Crandall Furniture, which is, they're apparently repurposing, all those office chairs that nobody's using anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, they buy chairs, they refurbish them with like new foam, they fix the lift mechanism, sometimes they replace the arms, and then they resell it at a discount. Yeah, and it's crazy how expensive office chairs are. Like some of the high-end ones are like $1,000, $1,800. Who wants to spend that on a chair? Like I get it, you spend a lot of time sitting in a chair, just like you do sleeping in a bed, but still, it's a good chunk of money to spend when you can go to like your local office supply store and pick up a cheap chair for like $99.
Yeah, and I don't think this was $99, but it wasn't much more than that. I don't have. If I had to guess, I probably got it from Costco, because I get many other things from Costco, right? But yeah,
and I had one of those chairs. I had one of those chairs as well, right? Where it was like, yeah, it worked well, and then once the pandemic hit and we were working from home, I ended up getting some wellness dollars from my employer, and use that to get myself a nice standing desk and an office chair.
And with that, we'll turn to our guest at this moment. He's specialized in cybersecurity for over 20 years and is a member of FBI InfraGuard, which is a group that I didn't even know existed, but it's a partnership between the FBI and the private sector for the protection of U.S. critical infrastructure. He's now the CEO of Blackswan, a company that strives to democratize enterprise-level security services, which one of my first questions is going to be, what does that mean? Welcome to the pod, Mike Saylor.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So what does that mean? I saw on your website that it says you wanted to democratize enterprise-level security services.
Sure. Well, I think in simple explanation is that we're trying to provide enterprise class services, what the big boys pay for, Fortune 50, Fortune 100, and make it affordable and scalable and flexible enough for smaller organizations, small, medium-sized businesses. Part of our mission is to provide that enterprise class service to what we consider underserved markets. So education, family offices, credit unions as an example, but also understanding that in each one of those situations, you've got a variety of business sizes. So you've got a 5-person credit union and you've got a $1 billion credit union. and they both need help understanding and applying cybersecurity controls and services.
So what happens today for those small customers, right? Or like the 5-person credit union? Like, how do they even approach cybersecurity today? Or what does their solutions look like?
They usually don't have one. They even have to, in a lot of cases, have to outsource their just normal help desk, hardware support, and they're relying on that technology expertise to assist them in cyber to the extent possible. But that's changing, and it has to. A lot of services and protections and controls that any organization today rely on, like insurance, in order to qualify for cybersecurity insurance policies, you have to demonstrate these, kind of good cyber hygiene practices, whether you do it internally or you outsource it. And so in order just to even get insurance, you have to spend some money to check some of these boxes. And there's not a whole lot of solutions out there, options for them to go with. Interesting.
And let's talk also a little bit about FBI InfraGard, because like I said, I didn't even know this. I'm really glad to hear that it exists, but I didn't even know it exists. What does that look like?
Sure. Well, so it started in the late 90s. I think the first chapter was in the mid 90s. And the idea is for every FBI field office, there should be an InfraGard chapter, and the objective of the chapter is to tie the office into the community, thereby expanding its eyes and ears, but also helping elevate the intelligence and awareness of the organizations in the community for the things that the FBI and that community is working on. So some bidirectional intelligence sharing, which really didn't happen for a long time. It's probably only been in the last 5 or 6 years that's really become more valuable. Prior to that, you might get an InfraGard notice a few hours or a day before something comes out on the news. So you really weren't ahead of it too much. But so now there's 45 chapters of InfraGard throughout the country. There's an InfraGard National Alliance that kind of manages all those independent chapters. And the chapters are made up of people from the community across all sectors. Kind of initially, it was all technology people. So 90+% membership in InfraGard were people in, CIOs and engineers and help desk people. But today we have nurses and doctors and farmers and people that work in infrastructure, water, dams, federal government, agriculture, I mentioned, nuclear. So each critical infrastructure sector has an InfraGard sector chief at each chapter who is responsible for going out and not just recruiting others from that sector to kind of strengthen the mix and dynamics of the chapter's membership. But it's also both a feeder into the FBI for intelligence and threats and awareness of what's going on out in the community, but also the FBI's ability to share with them so that they can do their job better, get ahead of threats, be more aware. So it's been a pretty effective partnership over the years. I helped stand up the North Texas chapter in the late 90s, and I'm currently a sector chief over healthcare. I was a sector chief over technology initially. I was the president of the chapter, and we have a pretty strong showing in our company as far as InfraGard goes. Our CFO was a past president. She's also the past national regional representative over, I think, 3 or 4 different states. Our COO was the president of the Houston chapter. He was also a national regional rep for a period of time. And then everybody in our company pretty much is a member. And there's a similar organization for the Secret Service. They used to call it the Electronic Crimes Task Force, of which I'm also a member. And then both of those are kind of related to in Texas, we have the North Texas Crime Commission, and they have subcommittees like cybercrime. And then the fusion centers that police departments operate. In North Texas, there's the Collin County Sheriff's Fusion Center, from which I'm also a Fusion liaison officer. So tons of intelligence sharing, information sharing, both to support the community, but also naturally with what we do, that feeds really nicely into the value that we can give our clients.
That's awesome. I actually, like you said, Curtis, I had never heard about this. And Mike, thank you for going into details, because that's actually a really cool program. Like, I didn't realize that the FBI connected in like this in sort of a systematic way, right, to all these other organizations.
Yeah, we've come a long way since the days of the Cuckoo's Egg, which I'm assuming you've read A Cuckoo's Egg, or the Cuckoo's Egg, I think. You know, because in that story from Cliff Stoll back in the day, when he contacts the FBI about a cyber attack that's happening on his infrastructure, they're like, well, did they steal anything? Right? They really weren't aware of the concept of a cybersecurity attack. So I'm glad to hear that, you know, things have come a long way since that was the 70s. So, you know, whatever. It's been a while since then.
Kind of along those lines, the other benefit of that is similar to the situation where, you know, there was an event. We always preach, as far as incident response goes, you've got to get ahead of that so that on game day, you know what players you can call onto the field, and you know who's going to show up. And so, you know, we're very adamant about establishing those relationships with law enforcement and subject matter experts and vendors in the community, so that when something bad happens, you're not leaving a voicemail, you're not having to figure out the right person to talk to. And so InfraGard and the Secret Service organizations give you the opportunity to actually they have chapter meetings, and a lot of times they're at the FBI's field office, which is also kind of cool. And so you get to meet people and exchange business cards and go to coffee and have their cell phone number instead of a mailbox number, and find the right person to talk to so that you can put them in your plan, and you know who to call, and they already know you. They've met you before. It's not a first date type of situation. So when things are going bad and the house is on fire, you know who to call, and they know who you are.
Yeah, I preach the same thing, Mike, and so but it sounds like InfraGard is an organization that I can contact, go to these meetings that you were talking about, that it could be that liaison, so that I can start to form those relationships. Because you're right, it's like you know, just reaching out to the FBI blindly. You know, hey, I'd like to talk to you about a potential future event that might happen, right? So it sounds like InfraGard can be that liaison then?
And you're right. And they do have, speaker, what do they call it? You can sign up to be a speaker, like as a resource, subject matter expert. But then the FBI also has speakers that can come to your event. And so very often you can pull in that law enforcement perspective to your message and your content, and they'll bring their own slides and, you know, whatever data they can share publicly as far as current events and statistics, and it's usually a pretty good value add as far as content, and sometimes it's a draw. You know, people may not want to just come see me talk, but if it's me plus the supervisory special agent over cyber, then all of a sudden it's interesting.
They come just for you, Mike. Come on.
There's a lot of value. There's a lot of value in membership. Each chapter has their own dues. Like I think our chapter, it's $25 or $50 a year, but that also pays for you know, food at an event, or you get discounts to go into some conference. So there's a lot of kind of cool ecosystem you belong to once you become a member.
I'm surprised this isn't publicized more.
It's
right?
infragard.org, infragard.org.
Yeah, I'm all over it.
I think you can sign up online. The application process can be kind of long, anywhere from 45 to 120 days. They do a cursory background, and then each office has to do kind of a vetting to determine if membership is for you. But then you're invited to kind of a new member session, and you get to meet people, the board, other members, FBI. And one of the things that I'll mention is, so for every InfraGard chapter, there is a full-time FBI agent that is your liaison. And so they kind of manage from the FBI side everything your chapter's doing. Even though your chapter has its own board of directors and event planning and all that stuff, there's always a full-time FBI person at your event, at your board meeting, kind of the liaison for anything you need that the Bureau can help you with.
That's awesome.
Go ahead.
Just follow up. I know you talked about sort of establishing those relationships, right, with other people who are in the chapter. Do they do things like tabletop exercises or other things, or is that kind of outside the scope of this group?
So the InfraGard membership, well, and different chapters do different things. Like the Louisiana chapter they're kind of known for maritime anti-drone capabilities. So there are people in that chapter that are involved in how to protect businesses along the river from drones and drone strikes and surveillance and all that good stuff. And so they do exercises pretty often, and they have some really good events. And the Houston chapter is good. New York chapter, not only do they do exercises, but they have a podcast. So they broadcast things. I want to say it was at least weekly, maybe monthly, but I think it's weekly. And they're very well known for their multimedia. And so they're different chapters kind of specialize and do their own thing.
Okay.
But then you're also invited to bigger events. So I know that there's kind of a large scale FEMA event every now and then, and so we're invited to participate in that. But as a chapter, as a community, the North Texas chapter has not gotten together and said, we could probably add a lot of value if we start to collaborate and participate together. Maybe this time we help, this company or this set of companies, maybe this sector like technology or healthcare, and next time we focus on something else. I think it's a great idea, but I haven't seen it done. But it's definitely something that they're open to doing.
Yeah, this is great. So let me just ask you one final question about this topic, and then I want to move on. And that is, there is a debate when, as I've been continuing to research incident response having to do with ransomware, there is a debate as to when or if to contact the FBI, right? Or just law enforcement in general, but in the U.S., the FBI. What's your opinion on that?
My opinion is as soon as possible. However, it's not always up to us. And by us, I mean, technology leadership, whether you're the CISO or the CIO, unless you're chartered to do so by executive management. I always suggest that whoever the IT leadership is, we're just putting out a fire. Whatever the incident is, we're putting out the fire. So from a technology perspective, our job is to recover. From a business perspective, you really need to defer that to your legal counsel or your whoever your executive is, or your insurance company. But your insurance company is going to say involve law enforcement as soon as possible. Your legal counsel, whether it's internal or outside counsel, is going to want to know more. But at the end of the day, and I've seen this from a lot of different perspectives, because I also do expert testimony in court. So if this ended up in court, one of the things that benefits you from contacting law enforcement as soon as possible is a phrase called due diligence. So when we talk about, all right, so you guys screwed up, but how diligent were you in trying to prevent this? How diligent were you in responding to this? And how diligent were you in asking for help from everybody that you could possibly ask for help from? And how open were you in understanding and communicating what the problem was? And so if in any of those phases you're perceived as less than diligent and possibly hiding something or trying to cover something up, when it gets to damages, if this lawsuit goes to damages, that's where it's going to come back on you. Because everybody that goes through an incident, obviously you're guilty of having gone through an incident. You didn't do enough of something, which is almost impossible, but when you're in court, it's kind of black and white, and at the end of the day, the fact is you had a breach. You had an incident, and it resulted in these things. All right, so you get a judgment for that. All right, well, then we go to damages, and some of that's black and white too. California especially, for every record of California citizen, it's defined. But on top of that, so that's statutory, but then the judge can say you guys were not diligent in protecting, responding, communicating, and because of that, I'm going to assess these additional fines. And so there's a lot to consider. And back to the tabletop exercise, that's when you need to start talking through, this is how this should
Right.
actually go. And someone's going to go, when do we call law enforcement? And we should look at the people in the room that would typically have that answer, and let's get that in writing ahead of time, and put
Right.
that in our plan as part of how we respond to stuff.
You don't want to be the rogue incident response cyber security person just randomly deciding to call the FBI.
Right.
This needs to be decided up front.
Now, I've been through some incidents, just real quick, where the incident was something illegal. And management said, you're not reporting that to anybody, we'll handle it internally. But there are certain cases where you are a mandatory reporter, having
Right.
identified certain types of things. And it's kind of up to you on how to handle that. But I would suggest, even if management said don't report it, that's your life you're dealing with. If they find out you didn't report it and you knew about it, now you're going to jail, regardless of what your boss said. So I would suggest there's ways of doing anonymous reporting, and then just capture that activity as evidence that you did report it. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're responsible for responding to stuff. And in addition to that, you may have access to things that require you as a mandatory reporter for doing something.
I was interesting you brought that up, Mike. I was just reading I think on Twitter or Reddit or something like that, where people were saying, like, as a programmer, right, if you're asked to do something which doesn't seem right, and the company gets caught, in the end, you're sort of the one responsible because you wrote the code, right? You did something when someone told you to do something illegal, potentially, right? And it's still your neck on the line versus, like, no one ever really gets like penalized like that for saying no to doing something illegal, right? And so it applies in various cases, including responding to being told to do something illegal. The one thing I did want to ask you, Mike, just going back to the question Curtis asked about sort of reporting, how do you feel that companies have done in being transparent about cybersecurity incidences?
Well, I think that's a double-edged sword, because it could seem like they're not being very transparent when really they just don't have a clue of what's going on. And I think that's the case the majority of the time. We got ransomware. How did it happen? Someone clicked something, I guess, but they really don't know. Or that's what they were told, even though that's not maybe really how it happened. So I think understanding comes from, information. Well, how do we get information? Well, you've got to have the right technology stack. You've got to have the right visibility and people and all reporting. And if any one of those areas is lacking, then your ability to really know what happened is diminished to some degree. So I think there's a couple of perspectives. I'm not just going to say there's two. There's the one where they just really didn't know what happened, and they're sharing what they know in whatever way they know how. In a lot of those cases, it's because they tried to address it on their own. They didn't bring in law enforcement or outside help or a professional firm or what have you. They just said, we had a problem. We're going to accept the fact that it happened and pay our dues, or whatever the consequences are, and we'll move on. And so there's that perspective. The other one is companies that truly can't, or have decided they can't take the reputational risk of divulging what happened. Some of that might be privacy or contractual. Like, you will never tell people that our network was compromised because we rely on you for these other things, and so clients could be impacted by your incident. Their business or service too. So depending on how your business functions and how complex it is with providing services or data to clients or third parties, you may be limited in what you can say. But I think what you're getting at is, there are definitely companies out there that will deny altogether that there was a compromise. Some bad guys put all of our customer data on the internet, and you can see it. They will still deny to the nth degree that they were not compromised, that they did not get that data from us. And I was actually in a case like that with a telecom company. The Secret Service called us and said, actually the FBI called us first and said, we're seeing your client data on the internet. And this was in the late 90s. We're seeing your customers' data on the internet. And when we started looking into it, they were all of our internet customers. And so we went back to our internet provider and said, it looks like all of this data is coming from you, and they denied it. Well, Secret Service got involved due to jurisdiction. It was different states and different things, and so we actually went to that company on site with the Secret Service and said, we're here to talk about this, that, and the other. And well, it wasn't us. It didn't come from us. Well, all the data that we were seeing, and it's not just related to you, it's got metadata in it that said it did come from you. No, it didn't. Well, we're not leaving until we talk to somebody. So they put us in this conference room and locked us in there, didn't let us out to go talk to anybody. And we had to, like, someone would come in and say, what do you need? And we would say it, and they would go out and look or collect that for us. And sometime during the day, I asked if I could plug into their wall jack and so I could have internet access to check email, and they said sure. Well, I started running a network sniffer, capturing network.
Of course
traffic.
you did.
And back in the day, they were using ICQ, the chat app, and I was capturing in plain text everything they were saying, and it was all about, we've got them locked in the conference room. They'll give up talking to us at some point and just go home. We're not going to give them anything. Tell Bob that he's safe. That his screw up is we're going to brush it under the rug and all. So I remember this little Secret Service lady, and I say she really was little. She was like 5 feet tall. Her name was Kim. She kicked the conference room door open, and it was the door that opened in, but she kicked it out. I mean, she knew how to kick a door. And she kicked that door and said, I need the executive team in this office right in front of me in the next 5 minutes or people are going to jail. And she took control.
Nice.
And it was probably maybe later that year we actually caught the hacker that did that. His name was Matthew Freeze. We caught him in Corpus Christi with the sheriff's department. I think he's still in jail.
Right. Yeah, so well, that's a great story with a great climax. I love the agent kicking down the door. Yeah, that must have been something to be there. So let me do a change of tack here. So, let's say we're a company. We have done we have an incident response plan, right? We've decided whether or not we're going to contact law enforcement. We did all of the things that a cybersecurity company asked us to do in terms of prevention and all of those things. One thing I am interested in is obviously we spend a lot of our time with talking about ransomware, right? And I understand that ransomware really in the end is just a payload of a much bigger cybersecurity problem, right? What I'm seeing a lot is that I'm reading that now, I think it was like more than 90% of what we used to just call ransomware attacks are really exfiltration attacks accompanied with ransomware, right? And so I have a couple of, sort of questions about starting with, given the way a typical ransomware attack happens, right? You get the initial access broker, then you get somebody that's in there and they start probing around, right? They start seeing how they can get around. And then my understanding is as soon as they can, they start exfiltrating data. So my question is, it's sort of two questions. Beyond the usual, there are some things that we know we should all be doing, right? In terms of password management and MFA and all of those, and patch management, right? Can you think of some things that a company that wants to take that next step, things that could either stop lateral movement, number one, and then just as importantly, if not more importantly, exfiltration of data? That was a really long question. Sorry about that.
And I had so many things I wanted to chime in with that I've lost some of them. But I'm glad when you said typical ransomware, you didn't go down. They clicked on an email, because that's not typical anymore. That's statistically probably the higher probability of success, but in a lot of cases, it's just that user that gets compromised, not the whole company. So you're right. Typically, the enterprise scale attack is via some either access broker, or the ransomware campaign has their own squad of pen testers that are finding ways into environments. But you're right. So typically it is access to the environment that then, as far as the phases of attack goes, then they start the reconnaissance. To answer your question about how do we address the exfiltration piece, my favorite response is it depends. And I say that a lot in a lot of different scenarios, and it's for good reason, because it really depends on the organization. And so each company needs to go through an exercise of figuring out what's important to them and where is it. Because maybe your data is already exfiltrated. It's out in a cloud somewhere. So I'm not even have to attack your company anymore. I just have to go figure out where your data is and attack that company. Or maybe it's a partner or whoever. There's tons of examples of bad guys figuring out where the important stuff is and making best use of their time and resources. So it really does depend on the organization. Understanding your technology stack, your architecture, your culture, and then obviously where is your stuff? Is it data? Is it a system? Is it a service? Because that's what bad guys are going to figure out. When they're doing the reconnaissance, they're looking for who is this company? Because in a lot of cases they didn't specifically attack you. They were running some tools and found a vulnerability and they picked at it, and now they've got access to some company's network. So they've got to figure that out first. Once they figure out who you are, they want to figure out what you do, where is your important stuff, including your backups. And then to some degree, they're also looking for your financials and if they can find a copy of your insurance policy, all these things. Well, all right, so depending on the company and your organization's particular situation, there are ways of addressing the data exfiltration problem. One of those is, let's put tighter controls around our data, and that includes like data integrity file integrity monitoring, restricted access, network segmentation, firewall rules that throttle data uploads or alerts of doing so. But I did want to address one comment you made. How do we prevent this from happening? And I really think people need to stop thinking about preventing it and start looking at ways of identifying it as soon as possible with either automated or human response as soon as possible. And then how do we collect all the information we need to make sure that we understand how it happened, what they did, and capture what we did to respond to that. And so that's very important for a lot of different reasons. One, if you put too much emphasis on prevention, then a couple of things are going to happen. One, you've invested a lot of money that could be more appropriately used in identification and response. Two, you're very likely going to become complacent, thinking that you've got everything in place you need, and that's not going to happen to us. And then lastly, a lot of those preventative controls don't do the data collection necessary to figure out how things happened. And we get asked a lot. We had this incident, and all we need to know is there evidence of data exfiltration? Because that's all we have to report. So what, we had ransomware. So what, we had a breach. If there was no data taken, then we don't have to report it. Okay, great. Well, let's look at your technology stack and the things that you have that would have collected that information, and they didn't have anything, or what they have wasn't configured well. And so we didn't have the information to determine whether or not data was exfiltrated to any degree. So we could see the network connections and the sessions, but we couldn't see the data throughput or even what the data was.
So in that case, though, Mike, is it you have to assume worst case that there was personal data or other things that was exfiltrated, or is it I don't know what was happened, so I'll just say I don't know, or nothing happened?
There's a couple of things there too. So I mean, fundamentally, all of your data should be encrypted as often as it can be, at rest, in transit, so that if it is exfiltrated, you were diligent in protecting your data, so that if it was stolen, there's a small likelihood that it's even usable. Well, not usable within relatively 10 years or whatever. Right. So encryption is very important from a diligence perspective. Well, then, in the absence of evidence that data was exfiltrated, and this is something you have to work with your legal counsel on, how do we then word our communication to employees or clients or even the state or regulatory agency about what happened? and very often it is stated similar to no evidence was found to support.
Right.
Right. So
Right.
it's not yes or no. It's we didn't find anything that said it did happen.
Yeah, we've talked about a number of those incidents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have no evidence that data was stolen, that because we had really bad tracking mechanisms that would tell us that data.
And it also depends on the threat actors. There are some threat actors that have a good reputation, if you can have one, as a threat actor that says they live by their code, and their code is if we steal your data, you have, let's just say, 3 days to acknowledge that you were breached. And then we'll submit to you an offer, so your ransom note. And if you acknowledge that you were attacked and you contact us within 3 days, then we won't put your company on the wall of shame, which is a public indication that you were compromised, and people that know us know that we have some or all of your data. So we won't do that. And then we'll give you the ransom note. And if you pay that ransom note, or if we start these negotiations and we go through this process and you pay us, then we promise to destroy all your data and keep it confidential, and we'll even give you good tech support while you're trying to recover. And so I've been through a variety of those types of incidents, seeing the gamut of bad actors that aren't very well organized and don't care, all the way up through the very organized ones that operate like a business, and they've got good customer support, or as good as it can be. But I will say that there is a trend towards data exfiltration with ransomware. There's still a large occurrence of ransomware where they don't care about your data. They just want to make sure you're all locked up, and that's what they're going to use for leverage to get you to pay. Because there's also the on the backside of that, even though threat actors are very risk averse, there is less risk from a consequence perspective, a prosecution perspective, of just compromising your network and encrypting your stuff. Sure, I'll get in trouble. Sure, I'll get jail time and all this stuff. But if I also steal your data, especially if it's regulatory data, healthcare, PII, whatever, that's additional charges if I get caught. And so in a lot of cases, similar to the data access brokers, you also have network access brokers. In addition to them, you also have the data brokers. So you've got and so it's this whole ecosystem. All right, so who do I know? Who can I pay to compromise your network? All right, got that. I have the access. Who can I pay to develop the payload? All right, got that. So payload's in there, ransomware's running, and now we've got their environment locked up, and we've got this data set. I don't want the data set because I don't want to get caught with it. So now I got to find a data broker that will buy it from me, who knows how then to kind of like diamonds, right? I bought the raw diamonds. I got to find a diamond cutter, and then I got to find a diamond distributor, and everybody makes their own cut. So there's still a large volume of attacks where this whole ecosystem comes into play, and you're just, depending on where you catch the attack, you're dealing with different threat actors.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wasn't aware. It sounds like it's kind of like felony murder, right? Where it makes it worse, right? You killed somebody, but you killed somebody in the commission of another felony. It makes it worse, even if you didn't mean to kill them, right? That's my understanding. Like even if it would otherwise be considered like accidental homicide or whatever, that because it happened in the commission of a felony, it makes it felony murder. That is an interesting concept. I by the way, Mike, even though it sounds like maybe I was saying differently, I completely agree with you with sort of the assumed breach concept, right? That you need to be just as good, if not better, with detection and response and recovery than the prevention aspect, right? Having said that, there's nothing wrong with an ounce of prevention, right? And that's why it bothers me. Like on one hand, we talk about some of the advanced things that you could do to help, but most people, such as preventing lateral movement between systems that don't need to have lateral movement, right? Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with that, but you're right. There's a cost of doing it initially. There's a cost of maintaining that, and there's a cost of cybersecurity is always a pain. Right, the more security you have, the harder it is to do your job. Right, unless you're the cybersecurity guy. lost me.
That's why convenience stores are robbed more than security stores.
I see what you did there. Let's talk about response and recovery, which is generally what we end up talking most of our time about here. What do you think is, we talked about the things that you need to do in advance, establishing a communication with the FBI or other law enforcement, establishing a relationship with somebody like yourself, so that you're not making that conversation the first time in the middle of an incident. What else do you think people need to do to be ready to respond in a cyber attack?
Well, I think tabletop exercises are a great way to kind of ferret that out for your organization. Sit down with as many people in your company as you can. I mean, a lot of IT departments are like, let's just do it with us first so we don't look stupid in front of everybody else, and that's fine. Have your red blue or red white scrimmage game, but then involve as many people as possible. And I've seen this be so successful. And even involve your insurance broker and your outside counsel, and invite the FBI, invite the Secret Service. Have this exercise and pick a topic. And whether you do it yourself or look for a moderator, and there's a lot of good moderators out there. I do these all the time. I'm considered a breach coach, but then there's even cybersecurity law firms that will facilitate a good tabletop. And the idea is, let's pick a topic: ransomware, or intellectual property theft, or our data center gets hit by a plane because we're close to an airport. Whatever it is, pick a topic. Invite as many people as you can and walk through the scenario. Somebody clicked the link and they came to work and their desktop icons are all changed and they can't use anything. Well, then we got another call, and then, all right, well, let's start with, who do they call? Who does an employee talk? Who is their phone number? Is there an email? What if email doesn't work? So who do they call? And then what does that person do? How do we assess the situation? Which is kind of phase one of incident response, is how do we categorize this event into an incident? Is it a non-event? Is it critical? And then that based on your plan would indicate who else needs to be involved once we categorize the incident. Well, then having as many people there as possible is valuable two ways. One, maybe you don't know who needs to be involved, and you can start asking all the attendees who are the right people, because I sent this email out 5 months ago and nobody's responded who the right person is, but we're all in the same room. Let's work it out. But at the same time, you're going to get some people going, I would have had no idea that's what's involved with doing X, Y, or Z unless I was in this room. And I'll tell you a funny story. We were doing a tabletop for a company. I think they're in healthcare. And part of the scenario was threat actor used the contact us button on their website to say, that's how they said, we have all your data, call us in 3 days. And here's the information to do so. And so that was part of the scenario. So I asked, well, who's in charge of the website? And there were two people in the audience, and they said, we are. And I said, well, what would you do if you got that email? And they said, we'd probably delete it because we wouldn't believe it was true. Well, okay, well, maybe you shouldn't delete it anymore. You should forward that to the security team and let them figure that out. And they said, good call. Good policy. But there were a lot of people in the audience that said, I'm glad I was here, because I would have had no idea that all these moving parts and this level of effort and this stuff is necessary for responding to whatever the incident was. Well, now it's a good time to ask the insurance broker who's on the call or in the meeting, when do we contact you? And they're going to say, well, as soon as possible. And from an employee company perspective, I think there was a misconception that calling the insurance like as soon as possible is somehow going to affect your premium. Like, we're going to pay more because we called you. And that's not the case. They want to be involved as soon as possible to help you make the right decisions, because
right.
You may be using third parties and buying, going through this expense that may not be reimbursable. You might not be able to get paid back for that even if your claim is accepted. But at the same time, the insurance company wants to know about how diligent you're being, and they want to be involved in the process, and that's going to help you determine, or hopefully help you towards getting your claim approved. And then they're going to be the ones, along with your legal counsel, helping you make the right decisions about how to communicate situations to third parties and outside, clients and what have you, but also internally. And we walked through this, just adding this real quick. All right, so you've got this incident, and we did this. We did a tabletop with an engineering company, and they didn't do anything we suggested. And then like 6 weeks later, they got hit with ransomware, and they were down for 2.5 months. But that's the other important thing about tabletops or any type of assessment. You really need to take the remediation seriously and take action on those things as soon as possible. Because if we found them, the bad guys have probably found them too. But one of the things that we found out in a tabletop or that came to mind was communications, specifically internally. So this engineering company got hit with ransomware. They were down. Nobody could do any work. And they couldn't even email people. All right, so do you have a system that collects personal emails and phone numbers? Do you have a system where people can call in to get status? Like, is it a snow day? Are we off for the day? Is there an incident? When are we going to hear an update? That kind of stuff. But then do you also have a policy that says, in the event of an incident, you are prohibited from discussing this stuff on social media? Don't put on LinkedIn, oh, we had an incident today. I guess I got the next 2 months off. That you've got to contain that, or at least define the messaging for that stuff. Get ahead of it. Go ahead and make your templates for internal and external communications. Like, what are we going to say? Well, you should plan for that now, instead of wasting time during an incident, trying to figure it out while the house is on fire. So having said all of that, incident response exercises are very valuable. And even though you may want to have your own little huddle to figure out, how well are we before we invite the rest of the crew, you should invite as many people, internal, external, subject matter experts, partners, as you can, to get everybody playing on the same team, on the same field. They show up at the right time, and they have an idea of what the playbook is.
Wow.
Yeah, wow, that's very detailed. And like you mentioned, it's sort of plan ahead of time, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sure there are so many companies where it's like, hey, ransomware hits or we have an incident. It's just IT and the security org that's dealing with this, right? But like you mentioned, there's so many other folks involved, and just knowing who those people are, especially if you're a large company, you don't know, like one department doesn't know who the other department is even, right?
We had a situation where for 4 days we were operating under the assumption that they only had a $3 million cyber insurance policy. So we were restricting who was involved to restrict the expense and the overhead. And it wasn't until we were on I think it was like 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday, we were on an update call, and we were talking about this $3 million policy. When someone walks, I could see them walk behind the person talking on the camera, and they go, "We have $6 million." Like, what do you mean? We have two $3 million policies, and nobody knew that. Nobody else but this person knew that. And that completely changed. We're like, well, we need to start getting more resources in here. Call the big brand response teams and all. So that really changed the game, because that just happened to come out in a meeting without everybody else being really aware of. The other bad part of that situation, unfortunately, was that they had $6 million in coverage, but what they didn't also know is that it was a self-funded insurance policy. So they were paying into that over time, and the insurance company said, "We'll cover you if the day comes, but then you've got to pay it back pretty much." And so they didn't know that either. So a lot of things came
read your policy.
I bet they found that out. Mike, we could talk all day. I love the stories, by the way. You know me, persona. I'm a storyteller myself, and I think nothing tells the story like a good story. Nothing drills that point home better than a good story, for sure. And I love hearing from these real incidents. What I'm hearing. So I like. The things that I picked up here, first off, I like the amount of time we spent on the FBI InfraGuard program. I definitely want to look more into that, and I think the listeners should look more into that. And I like this idea of using them as a way to establish those communication channels before an event. And I like the idea of, we always promote the idea of tabletop exercises. And, in my world, we call them DR DR exercises, right? Back before the cyber world was also attacking backup systems. So, I think this has been a great conversation, Mike. So I want to thank you for coming on.
Certainly.
And Prasanna, once again, as always, you with your wisdom.
Anytime, Curtis, and I hope you'll be ordering a chair, or at least browsing chairs soon. And Mike, thank you for the info. It's always fascinating hearing these real life stories, because that's something that you don't hear about, right? What did people experience and what was it like going through? It's just like what you read, like reading The Cuckoo's Egg, right? It's like those are the types of stories that are interesting that you learn from, especially new people in this space like myself, right? Where it's like, hey, what really goes on behind the scenes and what does it take to recover? So thank you for sharing.
Certainly. Yeah, I've got stories all day.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have you back on.
Yeah, you and me over beers, Mike. Nobody would ever get the word in edgewise. And once again, I want to thank our listeners. That is a wrap.